Obinna didn't just steal a face, he steals a destiny. But the dark magic acts like a parasite. By the time he marries the princess, he realizes he no longer remembers his own name or his own mother's voice. He has successfully become his brother, but in doing so, he has ceased to exist. The royal chamber was silent and cold. Obinna stood alone, wearing the heavy, golden robes of a king. He should have been happy, but his heart felt like lead. Slowly, he walked toward the large, silver mirror on the wall. He wanted to see his brother Chidi's handsome face, the face he had stolen using dark magic. He looked into the glass, but he saw nothing. There was no face, no eyes, and no skin. Only a dark, empty shadow stared back at him. Obinna tried to scream his own name, but he had completely forgotten it. In the village, life was simple but deeply unfair. Chidi was the golden child, loved by everyone for his kindness and his strong spirit. He always helped the village elders and shared his food with the hungry. Obinna, his twin brother, watched from the shadows. His heart was filled with a bitter, growing poison. While the people cheered for Chidi, they barely noticed Obinna. He hated the way his brother walked with such pride and ease. Every smile his brother received felt like a sharp needle in Obinna's chest. He did not want to be himself anymore. The turning point came during the great royal hunt in the deep forest. A massive, angry boar charged toward the king, ready to kill him in a flash of fury. Without a moment of hesitation, Chidi jumped in front of the beast. He wrestled the animal, protecting the ruler with his own strong body. The king survived, and he was deeply impressed by Chidi's bravery. He immediately offered Chidi a place in the palace and promised him the hand of his beautiful daughter. Obinna watched this happen from behind a thick tree, his fingernails digging deep into his own palms. Jealousy consumed Obinna until he could no longer sleep or eat properly. He knew that if he stayed in the village, he would always be second best. That night, under the pale light of the moon, he crept toward the forbidden dead woods. The trees there were twisted and grey, and the air felt heavy with old, dark spirits. He was looking for the ancient herbalist known for powerful, dangerous magic. Obinna did not care about the risk. He wanted the prestige and the love that Chidi had earned. He walked deeper into the woods, leaving his goodness behind. He finally found the herbalist inside a rotting hut. The old woman sat over a bowl of black, swirling water. She looked at Obinna and seemed to see right through his skin. "You want to be him," she croaked, her voice dry like dead leaves. Obinna nodded, his breath shaking in his chest. The woman warned him that the price was very high. To take his face, you must give up your own reflection forever. You will lose your own soul in the process. Obinna did not care about his soul. He only reached out, ready to pay the price. Obinna returned to the village with a small, dark vial hidden in his clothes. He found Chidi preparing for his journey to the palace. Chidi smiled warmly when he saw his brother, unaware of the evil plan. "Come, let us drink to my new life," Obinna said, his voice smooth and fake. He poured 2 cups of palm wine, but he slipped the herbalist's sleeping draught into Chidi's cup. Chidi drank it all, laughing and talking about the future. Within minutes, his eyes grew heavy, his speech slowed down, and he fell into a deep, unnatural sleep. Obinna dragged his brother's limp body into the center of the room. He lit a black candle and placed the bowl of obsidian water between them. He began to recite the ancient words the herbalist had taught him. As he spoke, Chidi's shadow began to detach from the floor. It moved like thick smoke, swirling around Obinna's head. The air turned freezing cold, and the candles flickered wildly. Obinna felt a sharp, ripping pain in his own face, as if his skin was being peeled away. He gritted his teeth and refused to stop until the ritual was finished. The smoke finally settled, and a heavy silence filled the small hut. Obinna crawled toward a bucket of water and looked at his reflection. He gasped in shock. The face looking back at him was not his own, it was Chidi's face. He had the same bright eyes and the same strong jaw. He looked down at his brother on the floor. Chidi's face was gone, replaced by a smooth, blank surface with no features at all. Chidi was now a faceless man, a stranger to the world. Obinna quickly dressed in Chidi's fine clothes, leaving the village forever. Chidi woke up hours later in total darkness. He tried to call out for help, but he had no mouth to speak with. He reached up to touch his face and felt only flat, cold skin. Panic filled his heart as he stumbled out of the hut. He walked into the village square, but the neighbors he had known his whole life screamed in terror. They saw him as a monster or a demon from the bush. They threw stones at him and chased him away with sticks. The real Chidi, now a nameless ghost, fled into the deep, lonely forest. Obinna arrived at the palace gates riding a white horse. The guards bowed low, believing he was the hero who saved the king. The king welcomed him with open arms and led him to the throne room. Obinna felt a rush of power as he walked through the tall, golden doors. Everything he had ever envied was finally within his reach. He saw the beautiful princess waiting for him at the end of the hall. She smiled at him, but Obinna felt a strange, hollow chill in his chest. For a moment, he couldn't remember why he was actually there. The wedding was the grandest event the kingdom had ever seen. Thousands of people gathered to celebrate the union of the hero and the princess. Obinna stood at the altar, surrounded by flowers and expensive perfumes. Musicians played joyful songs, and the air was filled with laughter. When it was time to say his vows, Obinna hesitated. The words felt heavy and strange in his mouth. He looked at the princess, who beamed with pure love and trust. He forced a smile, but inside, he felt absolutely nothing. He was wearing a crown, yet he felt like a hollow shell. After the ceremony, a massive feast was served in the great hall. There were roasted meats, sweet fruits, and the finest wines. Obinna took a large bite of the king's favorite dish, expecting a burst of flavor. Instead, the food tasted like dry sand in his mouth. He took a sip of the sweet wine, but it felt like cold water. The dark magic was beginning to take its toll. Because he had stolen another man's life, he could no longer enjoy the physical pleasures of that life. He sat among the cheering guests, feeling hungry and very alone. That night, while the princess slept, Obinna sat by the window. He tried to think about his mother, the woman who had raised him in the village. He closed his eyes and tried to picture her face, but the image was blurry and grey. He tried to remember the sound of her voice singing to him, but there was only silence in his mind. The magic was a parasite that fed on his history. To keep Chidi's face, the spell was slowly erasing everything that belonged to Obinna. He realized with horror that he was losing himself piece by piece. A few weeks passed, and the pressure of the lie grew heavy. One morning, a servant accidentally spilled a bowl of hot soup on Obinna's hand. Obinna fled with a sudden, sharp anger. As his temper rose, something terrifying happened. His skin began to ripple like water. For a few seconds, Chidi's handsome features melted, revealing the blank, featureless void underneath. The servant gasped and dropped the tray in shock. Obinna quickly covered his face with his hands and chased the man out of the room. His control over the stolen face was starting to weaken. The princess began to notice that her husband was changing. The man she fell in love with was kind, patient, and full of stories. This man was often silent, cold, and easily annoyed. One evening, they sat together in the royal garden. She asked him to tell her the story of their first meeting in the forest. Obinna panicked. He knew the facts, but he did not have the memory. He stumbled over his words and gave a short, dull answer. The princess watched him closely, her eyes filled with a new, growing sense of suspicion and fear. Obinna spent his days hiding in the shadows of the palace. He avoided the large mirrors in the hallways, terrified of what he might see. One afternoon, he found an old wooden box in the corner of his room. Inside was a small painting of a woman with a kind smile. He stared at it for a long time, trying to remember who she was. Suddenly, it hit him. This was his own mother. But as he looked at her eyes, her face started to fade into white mist. The magic was finishing its work, deleting his very last personal memory. The king ordered a great feast for the visiting neighboring lords. As Obinna sat at the high table, a ragged man appeared at the palace gates. He had a hood pulled low over his head, hiding his features. The guards tried to push him away, but the man gestured wildly toward the king. Obinna felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Even though the stranger could not speak, something about his presence felt familiar. It was the faceless wanderer, the real Chidi, drawn back to the home that had been stolen from him by his own twin brother. That night, a storm rolled over the kingdom. Thunder shook the stone walls, and rain lashed against the glass. Obinna could not sleep. He paced the floor, feeling like a caged animal. When he looked out the window, he saw a figure standing in the garden below. The lightning flashed, illuminating the man in the hood. For a split second, the hood fell back, revealing a smooth, blank head with no eyes or mouth. Obinna let out a muffled cry and closed the curtains. He knew his brother was close, and the guilt began to burn inside his chest. The next morning, the princess entered Obinna's chambers. Her eyes were red from crying, and she looked tired. She sat across from him and took his hands in hers. "Your hands are cold," she whispered. "And your eyes look like they belong to a man I have never met." She asked him to tell her a secret that only the two of them knew. Obinna searched his mind, but there was nothing there. He had the face of a lover but the mind of a stranger. He pulled his hands away and walked out without saying a single word. The princess knew she could no longer trust her heart. She went to the deepest part of the palace, where the sacred mirror of the ancestors was kept. It was a legendary object said to show the true spirit of anyone who stood before it. She called for Obinna to meet her there, claiming it was for a traditional blessing. Obinna did not want to go, but he knew that refusing the princess would look suspicious to the king and the guards. He walked toward the secret chamber, his legs shaking with every heavy step he took. The air in the secret chamber was thick with the scent of ancient incense. Stone statues of past kings lined the walls, their eyes seeming to watch Obinna's every move. In the center of the room stood a tall mirror framed in heavy, dark gold. The princess stood beside it, her expression calm but firm. "This mirror does not see skin or bone," she said softly. "It only sees the truth that lives inside a person." Obinna felt the dark magic within him twisting and turning. He wanted to run, but the heavy doors had already been locked shut. The princess commanded Obinna to stand directly in front of the glass. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, his heart drumming against his ribs like a trapped bird. He expected to see Chidi's handsome face once more, but the glass remained dark for a long moment. Suddenly, a pale light began to glow from within the mirror. The image of the royal robes appeared first, but above the golden collar, there was nothing. No eyes, no nose, and no mouth. The reflection revealed a hollow, faceless shadow that drifted in a sea of grey mist. The princess gasped and stepped back, her face turning pale with horror. "Who are you?" she cried out, her voice echoing through the stone hall. "Where is the man I promised to marry?" Obinna tried to reach for her, but as he moved, the stolen face began to peel away in layers of dark smoke. The beautiful features of Chidi evaporated into the air, leaving Obinna's head smooth and featureless. The magic had finally broken under the weight of the truth. He tried to speak her name, but he no longer had the mouth to form the words. The guards burst into the room at the sound of the princess's scream. They saw a monster standing in the king's clothing and immediately drew their swords. Obinna fell to his knees, clawing at the empty space where his face used to be. He looked back into the mirror, hoping to see at least a glimpse of his old, envious self. But even Obinna was gone. By stealing his brother's life, he had erased his own existence so completely that nothing remained. He was not Chidi, and he was no longer Obinna. He was a man with no identity. The king arrived and looked at the creature in the royal robes with deep disgust. He realized that his true savior had been betrayed by dark forces. "You have stolen a destiny that was never yours," the king declared. "And in doing so, you have lost the right to have a name or a home." He ordered the guards to strip the golden robes from the faceless being. Obinna was cast out of the palace gates in rags, shivering in the cold rain. The people who once cheered for him now threw dirt and cast a shadow among them. Obinna stumbled back into the woods where his journey had begun. The trees seemed to lean away from him, as if even nature was disgusted by his crime. He wandered aimlessly, his feet bleeding from the sharp stones and thorns. He realized that the world had become a very quiet place when you could no longer speak or be recognized. Every path looked the same, and every rustle in the leaves sounded like a mocking laugh. He was a prisoner in a body that felt like a tomb, wandering through a forest that held no light and no mercy. Near the edge of a dark stream, Obinna saw a figure sitting on a fallen log. It was the other faceless man, the real Chidi. They stood before each other, two identical shadows in the mist. Obinna reached out a trembling hand, wanting to beg for forgiveness or a way to undo the curse. Chidi stood up and looked at his brother. Even without eyes, Chidi seemed to radiate a sense of calm and peace that Obinna could never touch. Chidi did not move to attack, he simply turned away and walked slowly into the white fog. Driven by a tiny spark of hope, Obinna returned to his old village one last time. He stood outside his mother's hut, watching the smoke rise from the chimney. He wanted to feel the warmth of the fire and the smell of home. His mother stepped outside to throw out some water. She looked straight at him, but her eyes held no recognition, only a brief moment of confusion. To her, he was just a passing shadow, a trick of the light. She went back inside and closed the door, leaving him alone in the growing dark. As the sun began to set, Obinna sat by the dusty road. He noticed that his hands were starting to become transparent, fading like old ink on paper. The herbalist's warning was coming true in the most literal way. Because he had no name, no face, and no memories, there was nothing left to hold him to the physical world. He was literally disappearing from the earth. He tried to write his name in the dirt with a stick, but he could not remember the letters. The wind blew the dust away before he could finish. By nightfall, the spot where Obinna sat was empty. Only the tattered rags he wore remained on the ground, eventually buried by the falling leaves. The kingdom moved on, and the story of the twin who tried to steal a soul became a legend told to children. They were taught that envy is a fire that eventually consumes the person who carries it. If you try to live another man's life, you will surely lose your own. In the end, the most beautiful face in the world is the one that belongs truly and honestly to your own soul.